We're going to discuss contemporary issues in Hashkafa. So what I mean by that are items such as Das Torah, women in Judaism, related to the secular world, which means secular studies, the changes in morality, how you relate as a good citizen, country, and so forth, citizenship, questions of Israel, questions of Jewish identity, questions of Jewish unity. And any other topics you perceive in contemporary issues? Do you have any? Okay, if you have any suggestions, okay. But the fact is to start off the topic, what I want to do is I want to look at the issue as a whole. Just what do we mean by contemporary issues, and what makes them a contemporary issue? If you look at contemporary issues, one definition is that it's just this is an issue in this time period, but it could have been an issue in another time period. It doesn't mean that it's only specific to this time period. It's just, okay, it's an issue. It was an issue back in 1700s, 1600s, whatever. Another view of contemporary issues is there's something unique about it to this time period. These are issues in Hashkafa that have a uniqueness because of the time period that we're in. And that raises a certain question, in the sense that that's the way I'm going to be looking at this. But what makes it unique, right? So the point being is that if I'm saying the contemporary issue, what makes it unique? Now, if you think about this, if I ask you what's a contemporary halachic issue? So if you sit there and say something like something to do with electricity, you can understand why it's contemporary. You know, it's now, or it's didn't exist 200 years ago, so it didn't happen. Okay, the same thing with, let's say, nowadays we have the internet. Okay, so questions of concerning the internet or whatever, or concerning what's an interesting question, copyright laws in terms of audio or files or whatever. So the question is, what's Geneva on the internet, stuff like that. So that would be contemporary because there's something unique. So if we understand something new, we can understand it to be a unique contemporary issue because it never came up before. Okay. So the question is, does something like that exist in Hashkafa? Is there something new that exists that makes us ask new questions in Hashkafa? Okay, is there a Hashkafa question like electricity? Right? Well, the fact is that if we have something new, then that would be something that's unique. So one of the things we might look at is there something new in our world that makes something unique, that introduces a question of halacha. It's a little bit with halacha. With Hashkafa. Halacha, it's pretty tangible. There's the fact and so forth, so forth. But the question is there anything like that in terms of Hashkafa? The truth is that the world has gone through changes. Okay, there are changes in the social milieu of the world. Let's say women in Judaism. Let's say women. The status of women in the world have changed. Right? Women weren't able to vote. Before the 1900s, right? Now you have, a woman chancellor of Germany, right? And it's remarkable, right? So the point is, you say something changed women, but the truth is what changed there. It's not the same as electricity in terms of something real something scientific that changed. It seems to be that there's some attitude in the world that changed. And do we really care about an attitude in the world that changes? We have Torah. Torah has its system. What goes on in the world is just it's the world. Who cares, right? So something changes in the world. So good. They used to do idolatry. Now they don't do idolatry. Who cares? What does that affect in terms of us? So the fact is that really becomes part of the issue in terms of how do we relate to the world around us. As part of that issue, and given the fact that the world is dynamic and changing, okay, is that a factor or not? Now, the point is that let's take it just in terms of, let's say, something like science and electricity. You have the Amish, for example, who reject electricity because they want to maintain their lifestyle. So therefore, they don't want to accept any change outside of what they do because they don't want to check their lifestyle. That's the Amish. They'll reject even in terms of science and in that world. The fact is that we are welcoming to electricity. We're welcoming into perspectives and so forth and so forth. So therefore, that will have an effect upon our behavior. Electricity does change things. It's interesting because there's an article in the latest Journal of Halacha and Contemporary Society about changes in technology and how it affects its drabbanans. I haven't read the article yet, but I saw something. For example, the serum concerning washing clothes on Chol Hamoed may even also apply to. I haven't seen the article. Maybe he's also thinking in terms of the 9 days or whatever. Because he says, now what do you do to wash clothes? You throw it into the washing machine. It's not the same type of behavior. Okay? So he isn't going to be dealt with it, but the fact is that first of all he's going to deal with the fact that Gzeras Drabanan and how do you take care of changes in technology and the effect of Gzeras Drabanan. That's one aspect. But the fact is that there's this issue of a change and it can affect some aspects of behavior. But that's a halachic question.
Are you saying you're allowed to wash clothes?
No, I haven't read the article. I mean, the fact is that most likely when Gzeras Drabanan comes out, from what I know, first of all, there's an issue with this Gzeras Drabanan. If something changes, that affects the Gzera, right? So that's an issue of what the exact nature of the Gzeras Drabanan was, whether the Gzera was tied to the facts or whatever. So that's one issue. But there's also another argument in terms of washing clothes, whether it was actually the work or it was actually your mind. Because the truth is, by washing clothes, also you're not allowed to have someone else wash your clothes. So there's an aspect of it being concerned about it or whatever. So the question is, what exactly is the nature of the Gezerah and so on and so forth. But the issue arises when something changes in reality, how does it affect halacha? So the point is that you want to say, if you want to maintain things as they are, then it's easy not to have changes. But the world goes through dynamic changes with science and so forth. But the fact is, in Hashkafa, there are other types of changes, and it may affect things, but then we have to consider those changes.
So the abundance from the old, you can't paskin someone that paskin from a few generations, you can't overturn.
No, the Gzera, well, there's a difference between a psak and a Gzera. A psak is a legal ruling. A psak is very it's judicial. In terms of legal terminology, there's different legislation and judicial. Judicial is analyzing a law and making a derivation of the law of how the law applies in this case. Psak is actually very contemporary. You actually go according to later sources, given definitions of psak and who are involved. So the point is, you can't be cholik with, let's say, a rishon or whatever. But the truth is usually in psak we go according to Aliv the Basra. Shushmi is the last person because it's a matter of analysis. He has more perception and so forth, and that you can sort of make considerations. Legislation, which is Gzeras Rabbanan, is a statement that this is the law. It's a legislation. So the legislation exists, right? Don't do this. So even if the reasons for them creating the legislation fall off, the law still stands. Which, by the way, is a statement in terms of law, in terms of any legal system. If Parliament passes a law, even if we have all the arguments of why they passed this law, once the law passes, it exists independent of the reasons for it. Now, there are certain drabbanans that we consider to be tied to the reasons, certain drabbanans considered not to be tied to the reasons. Like, for example, if you have like an open cup of water that is not watched over, you're supposed to throw it away. Okay. So the fact is why? Because they were concerned that a nachash, an animal, might have gone into it and it would have been poisoned or whatever, and therefore that's a concern to throw away. The truth is a lot of people say it doesn't apply anymore because we don't have animals around like that anymore. Okay, so the point is that, but the way they say it is because when Chazal made the Gzera, they made the Gzera with that definition that with a concern for sakana, you should do this if there's a concern for sakana. Okay, but it really depends on how you define the drabanan. But the point is that that's an example of changes and so forth. But the truth is what happens if society changes or dynamic reality, and how does that affect Hashkafa? In that, it's much easier to reject a lot of what we would call the dynamic changes that affect philosophy, or theology, or ethics. We'd sit there and say, what does it matter to us? But the fact is that itself becomes part of the issue. But the truth is that sometimes it gets a little bit more difficult to draw the line. Like, for example, psychology. Okay, is psychology a science, or psychology a reflection of a philosophy in our age? So if you see psychology as a science, and this is the way human beings are, how does that affect our look at human beings? In terms of psychology, how does it affect the Torah statement? And there you're talking about scientific. If you call it a scientific development, then it becomes something where this is like a science. Okay, other people say no, it's basically reading into things the way you want to read into it. Okay, so that's part of the dynamics. You have the Torah is like eternal, and you have a relationship to the world that is the world is dynamic. Okay, the first thing is that it's so how does it affect us? The first thing is that Torah doesn't exist in a vacuum. Torah exists in the world. Okay, that's a famous Gemara in Shabbos. Moshe went up to Shemayim, and he went up to Shemayim at the Torah. The angel said, "What's this guy doing here? It's Kodesh Baruch Hu. What you're giving the Torah, the Torah, the greatest creation, whatever, to this human being, right?" And what's going on over here? So Kodesh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, answer them, right? So Moshe looks at him and says, it says, Kaveis avicha v'yasimecha. You guys got parents. You need kids, right? So he goes through all these cases. You need parents. You need, in other words, he goes through all these cases. So the Torah relates to human beings. So it relates in reality. It relates in this world. So the Torah, when we talk about the Torah being eternal, we're talking about the Torah as a system of thought, has an eternal aspect to it, but it connects to the reality of the world. And when it connects to the reality of the world, a psak, which is a conclusion, is the Torah understanding of what's happening in the world, yielding this conclusion. Follow what I'm saying? It's not it's not just simply like, and you see this in terms of halacha. You say halacha is like this. You look at Shulchan Aruch, it says here's the halacha, and then you see people not doing it. Well, their answer is, well, this was like this back then, and now it's different. Well, you mean Torah can change? No, the Torah principle stays the same, but the facts change, which yield a different conclusion. One of the most classic examples of this, for example, is the mitzvah ksivas Sefer Torah, the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. The Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, Rishon, says, what happened to this mitzvah? Right? People don't go around writing a Sefer Torah. Well, the simple answer is that it's not so simple to write a Sefer. It's very expensive. People don't have the money to get a Sefer Torah, and so forth and so forth. So that's an answer that you only have to spend up to a certain amount for mitzvahs to say, and so forth and so forth. But the Rosh presents another perspective. He says, what's the real mitzvah? He says that he has a halachic argument. The real mitzvah is not ksivas Sefer Torah. Ksivas Sefer Torah is the manifestation of the real mitzvah. What's the real mitzvah? To have articles to study from. Which means the only thing they studied from back then was a Sefer Torah. So have a Sefer Torah to study from. The real mitzvah is have works to study from. So he comes up with this perspective that says, but it's not as that in his time when they have manuscripts and they have other activities. He says now you can fulfill the mitzvah ksivas Sefer Torah by owning Gemaras. And then he was before the printing of it, or being Sforim, and so forth and so forth. What he said was, because the real mitzvah is not writing the Sefer Torah, the real mitzvah is having works to study Torah from. So when the only works was the Sefer Torah, because you couldn't write down anything else, then you had to fill the mitzvah Sefer Torah. But now that that's changed, so that there's other works that we can learn from, you can make the mitzvah of Sefer Torah by owning Sforim.
But the mitzvah wasn't learning Sefer.
That's what. No, but that's what the Rosh says. The Rosh says is that if you're looking through the Gemaras, he says the original mitzvah was not ksiva Sefer Torah. The original mitzvah was to have something to study from.
Where does he derive it?
His whole analysis based on word. He gets there's the pasuk over there. That's what he says. He says right. Some of it is Shira Hazot, and then it says something about learning from it. So, but he has Gemaras to back it up. That the real essence of the mitzvah is the learning. In other words, what he's doing is saying the eternal mitzvah of Sinai doesn't change, but you have to clearly define what that eternal mitzvah is. And then that eternal mitzvah hits the reality of the facts to yield the conclusion. There's a whole issue nowadays, for example, with certain things, like for example, showering on Yontif. Right? If you actually look in the halacha, it says you can't take baths. It seems to be showering would be a problem in Yontif. But the fact is if you go through the whole analysis of the halacha, it's basically that certain malachas are mutter on Yontif, right? It's malacha that are sorach chol nefesh, or for the need, specific need of eating, but basically for your need. But it has to be shavi chol nafshi. But it has to be something that is consistent for all people. So the Gemara says bathing or showering is out. Okay, washing your whole goof is out. Okay, why? Because wash your whole goof before Shabbos, right? Because you're not going to wash every day anyway. I mean, before Yontif, it's a din in Yontif. It says wash it before Yontif because you're not going to wash it every day anyways. Because the only things that are mutter on Yontif is things that you couldn't have done beforehand. But if you could have done it beforehand, you can't do it on Yontif, even malachos. But nowadays, where basically everyone showers every day, right? So a lot of people say that it's changed now. Now it's normal behavior every day for people to shower. Therefore, it's similar to sorach chol nefesh, to eat for eating food. Therefore, the halachic statement that says you can't bathe or not bathing, but you can't wash your whole goof, that was said given certain facts. Here's the eternal legal principle. Given the facts that people do this, yields this conclusion. But if the facts change, then the conclusion is going to change, and that's derived from the halacha that basically perceives that the issur is developed from the fact that of what's normal behavior, what kind of malacha is mutter based upon normal behavior.
So it's both rabbinic and to derisa?
Well, in this case, it's really a derisa concept. It's basically saying a malacha, because on Yontif, a malacha l'tzorach chol nefesh is mutter on Yontif. Malacha that is for what's called the need for eating, but that's extended to your physical needs, is mutter on Yontif. Okay, but what is permitted is those things which would not have been done beforehand. Okay, in other words, things that were daily necessities. That's why they asked a question about shechita. How come shechita is okay in Yontif? Just have them shech the erev Yontif. So the answer is because you can't compare an animal shechted today, having meat today than meat yesterday. Fresher meat is better. So therefore, there's a reason for doing that malacha on this day. But if you have something you could do, a malacha that you could have done on erev Yontif, right? You can't just go ahead and do it in Yontif. I'm going to put it off to do it in Yontif. You can't do it. It has to be something that has a tie to this day. But over there, what's happening with washing, what they basically say is so you wash once a week, so wash the day before Yontif. You have to specifically wash on Yontif. So that's because you could have done it yesterday, because it's not something you're going to do each day. Okay, and it has to be something. And let's say, what about one person who does wash every day? Says this has to be basically shavi chol nefesh. Has to be something generally accepted by all people involved with this. So that's.
Were there exceptions for people who are very particular?
In Israel.
What? That's a different halacha. Let me just. That's in this case is different. That's by Avelis. That not showering during Avelis is a different concept. that's because Avelis is not defined. It's a good example of this, by why we can shower, why people say it's okay to shower on the 9 days. Because the fact is that there's two different worlds. One thing is you're not supposed to have pleasure, but you are not supposed to maintain pain. So when showering is pleasurable, you can't do that during the Vedas. But if showering, what?
What about for health issues?
That's the point. If it's not,
in Israel, when the Taitim come out in heat waves,
right?
You see, all the from people are going into a nice cold
okay, but that's a different issue. See, cold shower is something different. Also, I was talking about malachos, but the fact is that in terms of Avelis, for example, go back to Avelis. The fact is that you can't bathe for pleasure, but you can bathe if there's a necessity to avoid pain or something like that. Therefore, bathing for health reasons is okay. Okay, in terms of Avelis. Nowadays, when everyone showers every day, it's not that they're showering for pleasure. Basically, not showering is a pain, but it's like a painful situation. So some people say that's why during the 9 days there are people say it's okay to shower. Okay, other people say no, but some people say it's okay to shower during the 9 days because it's not the pleasure of bathing; it's just the avoiding of the pain. Because we now are used to showering every day. Okay.
Being accepted in society today.
That's
work with people.
But
have to shower.
Okay. So that's part of the consideration. But you see, the world has changed.
But that doesn't apply to a 3-day yontif.
No, a 3-day yontif is something different. The 3-day yontif is not this issue. 3-day yontif is an issue rabbanan of washing your whole goof with hot water. I'm talking with hot water. Cold water is a different issue, but the fact is that there's an issue of warming water to wash yourself. Okay, so take like a hot shower. There's another issue with bathing, which is another consideration, another drop on it. But the point is showering. Since you don't wash your whole body, since you're not bathing, but you're washing one part of your body, another part of your body. Basically, you put yourself under the shower. You're never your whole body is never totally immersed in water. The point is you have hot water. Heating up water to bathe is a problem in Yom Tov. Even though heating up water is okay to eat, because bathing was not considered to be an activity that you couldn't have done yesterday. And even if you were a person who did wash every day, that wasn't something that everyone did. But nowadays, when everyone does it, and people, what do you mean not wash yesterday? It did wash yesterday. So that changes the idea. So people say, well, that changes it. Oh, but you have Meferish in the Shulchan Aruch, you can't do that. Because the Shulchan Aruch is basically saying, here's the legal principle, meeting the facts, coming to this conclusion. But if the facts change, the legal principle is eternal. The Torah is eternal. But but the principles change, but the facts change, the conclusion can change. So that's what people are arguing today.
I just want to clarify the issue.
Yeah.
The issue that you're saying is not bathing, it's heating water for bathing.
I'm not being exact. It's heating water to wash your body. Bathing is a different issue. The truth is that
right.
I should have been more...
the issue of heating water for the purpose
of washing your body. You can heat water to wash your hands and face because that's normal. But heating water to wash your whole body...
Nowadays, nobody heats water for a specific intent.
Yeah, but the fact is you are, by turning on shower. You're turning on your shower, you're heating the water at that point in time.
No, the water's already been heated.
The fact is you are heating water. The point is that when you turn that on, the water's coming in to be heated. You're doing a malacha. That's why we don't turn on hot water on Shabbos. Because you're doing a malacha. So when you turn...
It's slightly different, with all due respect.
Yeah.
I would argue is that you're forbidden to heat water on Shabbos, flat out.
Right.
To cook.
Because it's cooking.
Right, that's right. So you're forbidden to do it
right.
under any conditions.
Right.
In this case,
okay, so
you're standing with hot water.
Right. Okay.
You use it for the shower, and then you're actually heating water.
Okay.
For another purpose.
Okay, so I should be more exact. I should be more exact because you're right about what you're doing. The point is why can't you turn on hot water on Shabbos? Because you're doing a malacha. Okay. You have hot water. The truth of the matter is, you wash your dishes. What?
You're emptying the tank.
Okay.
You're actually into something.
Okay. So the point is like this. It's not just. I was using heating water because that's the case in the Gemara, but I'm using it like this. When you turn on your shower, right? You turn on the hot water in your shower. You are doing a malacha. right? The same way as you do on Shabbos. You're doing a malacha. The question is, can you do that malacha in order to allow you to shower? But you're doing a malacha.
No.
Yes, you are.
I would argue that you're doing a malacha in order to wash dishes after the shower.
No, you're not, because the fact is...
The water of the shower has been heated the night before.
That's my point. You're correct. It's not the matter of whether the water is heated from before or not.
But you're allowed to heat water to wash your hands. You're allowed to heat water to wash dishes. You're allowed to heat water...
Right, exactly. But you're not allowed to heat water, because the fact is you're only allowed to... See, in Hilchos, in Yantiv, things are not recognized in terms of the details of Yantiv. Yantiv is not you're allowed to heat water. Yantiv is you're allowed to heat water for certain purposes. If you heat water for other purposes, the truth is that let's redefine it. You're allowed to do malacha for certain purposes. So I can turn on a hot water tap on Yantiv to wash dishes because that is a purpose that allows me to do a malacha. The malacha being turning on that tap. And de facto heating up other water, not the water I'm specifically using now. But the fact is I'm doing a malacha. Okay, can I do a malacha to wash dishes? Yes. Can I do a malacha to wash my full body? No. That's the point. No. Why? Because, okay, that was not deemed to be a purpose that fit the rules that allowed you to do malachas on Yantiv. The point is what happens if the rules if that fact changed? Then doing a malacha happens. So nowadays, when everyone showers every day, basically it's normal for people to shower every day. The point is that it becomes that washing your whole body now has a different category that puts it much more in the category like washing dishes. And therefore it's okay. And therefore you can do a malacha to lead up to this. So, you're right. The way I define it, heating water, that's the way the Gemara talks about it. The fact is that's a little bit different, but it doesn't affect the fact you were doing a malacha. Which thing? But what I'm trying to say is that the facts change. It changes that, and that's in halacha. Another example. Let's say Rabbi Yoshiber's position on shaving and chol moed. A specific thing. It's shaving chol moed. The Gemara, stuff like that. Rabbi Yoshiber held that if you look at the Gemaras, it was because they didn't shave every day. So the fact is, if you didn't shave Erev Yontiv, right, there was a knas for you. No, what do you mean? You can't put it off to shave Chol. You're supposed to get ready for Yontiv. So therefore, make sure you get ready for Yontiv and don't put off your shave. Oh, I have time to do a Chol Moed, because you didn't shave every day. But what about when you shave every day? So he has arguments in the Gemara that points out that in that case, it's a different fact. In that case, for someone who shaves every day, he actually ends up saying that they should shave at Chol Moed, because not shaving at Chol Moed looks like a siman of Eilis. But in other words, he learns the Gemara saying specifically for people, which was normal in those days, who didn't shave every day, this was the halacha. But the principle behind that halacha, if the facts change, the conclusion will change. Now this is something very difficult for most people work with, because what about the reform, whatever? That's the whole point. You have to really know halachic analysis. But the point is that's in halachic. Contemporary issues basically say the world changes. So some things it's very easy. Obviously, what do we do now with the internet? Well, they never had it before. But now they say, well, what happens if now we see different behaviors happening in society? Because people who really check out the halacha figure out that there's a new social, a new facts that the eternal halachic principle, Torah principle, applies. But Hashkafa yields the same type of issues. Something changes in the world. The only thing is maybe we're not supposed to be caring about those changes in the world. Something changes in the world. So there's psychology, women change, something attitude towards women change. Oh, that's me. Just say that's that's nothing to do with Torah. Those or are those facts that change actually then the Torah, the eternal Torah principle applies to those facts in a different way. But the point is the way we're different than, let's say, the Amish is because that we do recognize change, and the fact is that also Torah doesn't live outside of reality. That's the lesson from Moshe Rabbeinu. It's a human being situation. So Torah is supposed to connect to humanity. So what happens with human beings? Therefore, Torah has to be cognizant of what happens with human beings, and that's how you get conclusions in Torah. But what I want to go to is that there's a very there's a real interesting issue here. The world changes, okay, but how do we care about the world changing? How do we look at the world changing? Yes, science changes. So I said, okay, you have a little question, the psychology of science, and then how does that work with Torah and stuff like that. But the fact is, usually in realms of Hashkafa, it really changes this social consciousness, philosophy, those type of things, which are not as black and white, and maybe we could just reject them and say that that's just outside the world. What happens in non-Torah philosophy? What happens in non-Torah ethics? Who cares? Doesn't matter. Now you can already see that yields part of the issue with secular studies. Okay, secular studies of science, yeah, we all need science. But secular studies outside of science, maybe we just not gairs it. We just don't recognize that, because all that will do is cause issues to Torah standards. Right? Here's the Torah, and who cares what philosophy, ethics they come up with? Okay, so what happens in that is that becomes really the first issue of contemporary issues. Is that this dynamic issue that's happening in the world doesn't affect, maybe it should just not be guras by Torah. Which, if you notice, in terms of the broad perspectives of our world, there's some people who basically say nothing to do with the external society, and other people embrace the external society. But embracing external society or not embracing, really what the issue is the dynamic movement that happens in society. Okay, it's how much do you go outside to work or whatever, but it's that society is in dynamic movement, and this leads to a very significant principle. In that dynamic movement, is to recognize there's a dynamic movement. That in that dynamic movement, it is belief that human beings' morality has progressed over history, and this is a significant perception. I have an article that's going to be coming up on our website called Halachic Movement, and in it I make the following statement: we look backwards to revelation, right, for direction, right, for what's correct. The world looks forward to what will be in terms of understanding what the ideal ethic will be. We are looking back towards the revelation, in contrast to the world looking forwards. Now, if you think about it in terms of philosophy of the Hegelian thought, in terms of philosophical movement, how the world moves forward in terms of the development of ethical values. Right, so that's significant in terms of the world says that we are more moral today than they were 500 years ago. Right, now we don't have slavery. 20 years ago, they did have slavery, even in America. Right, so the fact is we consider movement. Anyone looks at our world today would say that we are more moral than they were 500 years ago. Right? We don't have inquisitions anymore. Things of that nature. So the perception of the world is that the movement of morality is forwards. And this has to be taken in contrast to Torah in terms of the perception that we're looking back for our moral perspective. Okay, so the question is that's one of the tensions. First of all, do we even acknowledge, or do we have to care about what's happening in the world? And this happening in the world seems to run contrary to fundamental perception of Torah. So the fact is, though, is it true that the Torah only looks backwards for morality? Does the Torah have any perception of forward movement in morality? Any perspectives on that? Is there any perspective in the Torah that in certain ways we are more advanced than previous generations in terms of Torah ethics, Judaism, Torah, something of that nature? So the truth is that it's not so simple. We would say no, because we have previous generations that are greater than us, which means we don't look further. Therefore, any movement forward seems to be something that inherently can be simply rejected. The truth is, it's not so simple. Okay, first of all, while we look backwards to Har Sinai for direction from Revelation, we also look forward to Yemei HaMashiach in terms of some perfection. So in that idea, we perceive Yemei HaMashiach as accomplishing something that didn't exist beforehand. Right? The Yemei HaMashiach means we're going somewhere where we are going into a new territory that is better than a previous territory. Right? Isn't that a concept of Messianic age? Right? That we're moving forward. Now, it's a question of the Gemara says, when you get so bad, of course, Baruch Hu takes over and brings Mashiach, but the point is, the general perception of Messianism is the fact that we are moving forward to some ideal, and some movement forward.
We know what we're looking forward to. That's different perspectives of what is considered Yemei Mashiach, what's going to be.
Right, for sure. But the perception is that there's some moving forward. Like, for example, when people talk about vegetarianism, there's people argue that in Yemei Mashiach we're vegetarians. So there's an idea that we are not the way we should be now, we're going to be that way then. Okay? So that's an example of vegetarianism. A lot of people don't agree with that, and so forth and so forth, but the point is that there's a projection that this is an ideal. Now the truth is, it may be not an ideal, we know what we're looking for. But the point is, it seems to be that there's some movement forward. Take Rav Kook. The Raya Kook argued that the return to Eretz Yisrael in Torah, in Hashkafa, right, was a movement forward, right? That we were leaving Galus, which had to do something and so forth, but that leaving Europe and moving into a new perception from Europe was a movement forward. Right? And therefore the Torah changed because of that movement forward. Now this becomes a further issue. I'm just pointing out that we have in Torah a perception of stability and basically looking backwards. What I pointed out is the world has a movement forward aspect. That there's a dynamic shift in the world that's moving forward. Okay? How do we relate to that? Well, in the first issue is that the whole concept of moving forward, does that have any place in Torah? So the truth is, a lot of people say it does. There's actually a book out by Dr. Silman who basically says that he has two views of Kabbalah Torah. He says one view of Kabbalah Torah he calls the classical view. Okay, he says that perfection was at Sinai, and all we're trying to do is protect it. Okay, we can't improve upon it because that was perfection. We have just to protect it. There's another view which he calls a romantic view, which is the view that Sinai started the ball rolling, but there is something better at the end of the world. Now, the truth is that that's a tension between Sinai and Mashiach and things of that nature. And there is that tension brought out in certain ways. But even if that's within Torah, that doesn't necessarily mean that the movement that's happening in the general world is the movement that we're going to connect to. We see that there's a movement in the general dynamic. They're moving forward. There's no doubt that there's movement, and they perceive it moving forward. We basically will look at the idea. The simple understanding of Torah is that stability is the best way. If we maintain the same society, if we were on some desert island, and that if someone came to this desert island, they would see the same society over 500 years, but maybe allowing for some changes because of science, we would say, yeah, that's a Torah society. But the fact that the world is moving. So the point is, and I'm trying to point out, that's not necessarily so. This idea of moving forward has some perception within Torah because of these concepts of Mashiach. I'm going to get to another example in a second. The fact is that the fact is, but that doesn't necessarily mean the movement that's occurring in the world is the movement that would parallel what the Torah thinks the movement is. All I'm pointing out is that dynamic movement in the world, which is defined as a movement forward, may have a place, but it may not be that the movement forward that's going on in the world is the movement forward that we would want. Okay? But let me give you an example from this. Another example. There's a book by Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz called it's something about women and Jewish law, I think. But it's a book on women, and he introduces and Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz was a pretty progressive thinker. He's in terms of women. He's like one of the he is to the left wing of Orthodoxy and and in terms of women's rights and so forth. But he's also was big Talmid Chacham. He was on the Street Yesh's Bezdin. So
Do you have that book?
What?
Do you have that book?
I had the book,
Can I
right?
borrow it?
If I find it. Yeah. Eliezer Berkowitz is a big Talmid Chacham, and he like I said, he was on the Street Yesh's Bezin. So if you're on the Street Yesh's Bezin, you got to know something. But Eliezer Berkowitz has this concept. Now the truth is, I read through his book, and there were concepts that he brought in his book that I had problems with, like I had issues with, and so forth and so forth. I'm not saying I'm totally in agreement with him, but he has to say, but he presents this concept. It says there's a distinction between Torah tolerated rules and Torah mandated rules. And Torah tolerated rules are rules that the Torah tolerated at the giving of Har Sinai. Okay? Not that the Torah declared this is the proper ethic, but the Torah said, given where the human beings are today, here's what we're going to tolerate for this time, with hopefully having the intention of affecting change. For example, slavery. Okay? The Torah rules of slavery. They don't outlaw slavery. Why did the Torah outlaw slavery? So his argument is obviously the Torah thought slavery was wrong. And there's a lot of indications to point that slavery was not such a good thing. However, given the state, the state of mind of the people at Har Sinai and the world around, Kodesh Baruch Hu could not have simply outlawed slavery. It would have been too much of a shock to them. They wouldn't know what's going on. So his argument is that the Torah created rules that allowed for slavery, but inherent in those rules was the development of a negative feeling towards slavery. So basically, it was an educational system. We'll let you do it, but through this system of how we're going to let you do it, you will eventually not want to do it.
That's Torah.
What?
That's not Torah. Torah's not, let's see, do it for now, but I'd rather you change.
Okay.
Torah is law.
That's right. That's the major argument against Rabbi Berkowitz's argument. What are you talking about? The Torah says this is the law. It's an eternal law. The fact is,
you can see it though.
So the fact is,
you do see it.
You do see some aspects. That the truth is Rabbi Berkowitz's concept is really based on the Rambam. The Rambam basically argues that there's absolutely no value in karbanos. Why did the Torah have karbanos? Because that's the way people related to deities at that time. So he introduced karbanos, but eventually, if you look at the whole rules of karbanos, it was eventually to wean people away from the karbanos. That's what he argues in the Morning of Ruchim. Wait a second. Wait a second. That's a good question. That's what everyone yells at the Rambam about. What are you talking about? Okay, what are you talking about? Because he argues, what's the Yisur of Bamas? And what was the idea of having a one base of Megdish? It was get him away from this idea that sacrifices was some way of relating to the deity. What is killing an animal to do with killing the deity? So there's arguments that eventually in Zman Mashiach, you don't need these sacrifices. That's what people will say. The Rambam don't pass because the Yad Chazaka are not like that. In the Yad Chazaka, he argues that there's just going to be karbanos, reintroduction of karbanos. It would be basically just reintroduction of karbanos. Okay, so the point is that people point out it to be a stira between the Morah and the Yad Chazaka. So a lot of people say, the Morah was basically, he wrote that to try and convince people of how, like, the Morah is not his real statement. His real statement is Yad Chazaka. But the Ramban yells at the Rambam for saying things like this. The point is, it's a challenge. But as Shani's pointing out, the fact is you see rules like that. You see the development of certain concepts that happen over time.
Okay. See it at the time while you're learning it, because it's already seems to be changing.
That there are developments. I'll give you an example. Karbonis is a classic example of the Rambam, but for example, you have the questions of a smachtas. Smachtas are drabanas, where the Torah seems to hint that this is a good law to do. Not now, but in the future, it'll be a good law to do. Well, it means when you get around to it, you can do this law, but it doesn't really change. It means there'll be a good time to introduce a law of that nature. But there's other questions, like for example, let's look at monogamy. Okay, the issur of having more than one wife. So how do you look at that issur? So you sit to say, is Xera of Rabbeinu Gershon? It's a kind of Rabbeinu Gershon, and he's trying to have more than one wife. But is not monogamy an ideal or not an ideal? Is it right to be monogamous or not?
And the Sfardim didn't hold of that anyway.
Right. Well, most part,
But
right?
again, it was
We're
with the
good numbers.
times. But it was with the times.
So you see, but
Then there was a need for it, for more than one wife. Today there is no need for that.
so now you're already. So wait a second. Does the Torah usher more than one wife?
You're not a man. How do you know?
Yeah, the
There's
Torah.
not a need for it.
The Torah
I'll
ushers.
tell you what, because years ago, a job of taking care of the children in the home, like doing laundry, was a whole day thing. You were down at the river hitting the rocks.
So good.
You were grinding the wheat. You needed other women. You needed the house.
Good.
They got a washing machine.
Yeah.
You're not the man who decides, I want this type of wife and I want this type of wife.
He doesn't get it anyway.
Wait, so you guys just sounded like the whole argument over the polygamy and the sister wives, right? The whole argument with the sister wives, with the argument you need more than one wife, raise the kids, and so forth and so forth, right?
But they wouldn't understand then, and children dying, and that's a different lifestyle, and just like talking about then. Yeah, times have changed.
Okay, but do you see what you've just done? You see what you've done? What you've done? You basically said that, but the Torah did not usher it. The only issue in the Torah on polygamy is a limitation on how many wives a king can have. But a stum guy who's not a king, he can have 100 wives, not a problem. Shlomo Melech couldn't have 1,000 wives because he was a king. If he was Mr. Melech or Mr. Shlomo, he could have 1,000 wives. The point is that, so what is it? Is there a better value in having more than one wife, or is it? But you see what you're saying by not today? But what you're saying is that you're saying, so there's an issue. The Rabbeinu Gershon make his takana, because that was going around. He was living in Christian countries, but he was saying, "You want to stand up?" Or did he perceive it? Or what?
Didn't he make it more for personal reasons?
What?
Rabbi Gershon, wasn't it more at that time for more personal because of what things that was going on in the situation?
But the point is, or was he making a statement that we are now ethically able to state that this is the standard? See, there's an interesting argument. It's an interesting argument. If you look in terms of Chumash, who had more than one wife? Who had more than one wife?
Avram.
Right. So the fact is that Avram Avinu only had one wife until Sarah said, take another one, right? Because he had to have a kid. But it seems to me the idea was only one wife. But then for reproduction, whatever, he got a second wife. Yitzchak had one wife. Yaakov wanted one wife. He just wanted Rachel. Then he got Leah, and then somehow the reproduction issue gets involved with Bilhah and Zilpah. But the point is that it raises this issue of is that the ideal, not ideal. The point is I remember reading somewhere that someone says in terms of Chazal, there's only one case of Chazal having more than one wife at the same time. They remarried if they had a divorce or Chas V'Shalom their wife died or whatever. But in terms of having two wives at one time, someone said there's only one member of Chazal that had two wives at the same time. So the point, what?
Elkanah also had two wives.
Yeah, Elkanah had two wives. Also, but there's other cases that have two wives. Now, if you see David had more than one wife, the truth is you're dealing with a lot of different issues. I mean, the point is all I'm trying to point out is that here's an example. Is monogamy the ideal? So if it's the ideal, why didn't the Torah usher it based upon the statement of the law? So the argument is maybe they're giving reasons, not where they couldn't, they changes, whatever. Now you're saying, but eventually we'd like to have this ideal, right? So once we get the washing machines, we can get rid of that second wife. Third wife, just get the maid. But the fact is,
the Torah knew this was going to be.
Right. Well, but
he knew what was going to happen.
Right. So the fact is that's where you're getting into some of this issue, in terms of a dynamic change in reality, and how do you look at it? And the fact is that there's one attitude that the Torah was saying the ideal. Or is it the Torah was giving the ideal given the circumstances and the level of society at that time, and therefore, but expected man to work towards another ideal? The Rambam that's really what Rabbi Berkowitz is getting at. What Torah tolerated slavery. Was slavery ever really the ideal? No, there was obviously a negative feeling of slavery. So why didn't the Torah just usher it? But still today, it's not usher to own a slave. But the fact is, you see this issue with monogamy. Okay, and that's the kind of tension that exists. Well, so just to recap where we are, Okay, and there's other issues as well like this. The fact is, just to recap where we are, the simple understanding of Torah is that it is looking backwards. The classical model of Dr. Silman is that there's the ideal, and we just got to protect the ideal. So if we had a society based upon Torah, okay, it wouldn't change. It'd be the same society. Every year would be the exact same society, which is the way you have a lot of people talking. And I just read a book on the Satmarav, and everything he said, and basically Satmarav said, basically his attitude was, this is the way they did in Europe in 1800, that's the way we're going to do it today. Because the idea was to maintain the stability. Okay. The point is so I raise the fact you're living in a dynamic world. Okay, science changes. What? 1800?
No, how does one pick the date? This is the date that it should.
No, he would. Usually, when people pick dates, is that's the date everyone agrees is this is the way it was in 1800, and they're saying, and the assumption is it's been like that since Avraham Avinu. There are people who I've told, I'm talking to someone, and let's say talking about Beck issues, okay, Streibels, right? There are Beck issues that came about Poland. But people will tell you what he's talking about. What are you talking about? Moshe Rabbeinu, we're a beautiful white Streimel in Beckisher, right? A beautiful white. You see it in the desert walking around, a beautiful white Streimel. Okay, the fact is that
what animal did he kill for this Streimel? That's the question.
By the way, if you get into that issues, where did they get all the animals they killed to make the coverings of the ark? I mean, the fact is, yeah. So there were the animals. Good. The animals running around the desert as well. I mean, the truth is that okay. So, anyways, all I'm getting at is the fact is that if the attitude is that there's a static attitude of Torah. Torah is static, didn't change. Then you throw the fact is Torah relates to a world. The world does change. Science changes, so forth and so forth. We're just looking at the sciences changes. Okay, that we have to be masculine to. Okay, so therefore, Halacha changes, but Hashkafa can say the same and so forth and so forth. But the fact is once then there's changes in the world in terms of social sciences, the humanities, theories, a lot of things of that nature. So the point is that and behind that is this attitude that we're moving forward. That we know more today than previous years. We're more advanced than the previous years. We're more ethical, so forth and so forth. So therefore, we seem to be totally opposite to what's happening in the world. So then what I've done is introduce the concept that there's issues in Torah that Torah itself may look forward. May also have an aspect of attention that there's an ideal that we're moving toward. There's an ideal of Sinai, there's an ideal we're moving towards. And that creates attention. Okay, so the point is now that idea of having a forward movement is not so foreign to us, but that doesn't mean the forward movement is exactly the same as the forward movement that exists in the world. But the point is that becomes a new tension. Yeah, there is some aspect of moving forward, but is this the movement forward that we want to accept? That becomes part of the issue of contemporary issues. When you look at contemporary issues, let's say women is an example. Attitude towards women have changed. Well, we don't care what this attitude was. The way the Torah's attitude towards women was, the way they were finding 1600 is the exact same idea. No changes. Okay? Well, wait a second. Maybe this movement forward, as we have movements forward, maybe it's an idea. Well, who says though that the movement forward that exists in our world is the exact same movement forward that we would want? But so we have these two issues that imply in terms of movement forward. Okay, so I'm going to so these are the issues that are really behind all contemporary issues, as unique issues that exist in our world today. That there's something changing in the world, and how do we relate to that change? And the tensions in Torah to that relation to change deal with, first of all, how do we relate to change generally in terms of this movement forward, and secondly, is the movement forward the same type of movement forward that we would promote, and so forth. Okay, I'm going to give you a good example of this, because there's one other factor that involves. There's the factor involved, the fact, as I said before, we live in the world. Okay, so the question is, how far do we live in the world? So I'm going to point out to you. We live here in Canada. Canada believes in democracy, freedom of religion, rights. What do you think the Torah attitude is to freedom of religion? If you were forming a Jewish government, would you apply the Bill of Rights? The American Bill of Rights, the Canadian Bill of Rights, would you apply including freedom of religion? If you were creating a Torah government?
No.
No. So one answer is no. Okay? Now let's assume that answer is no. So how would you respond to that? The fact is, how would you respond to that? The fact is on the surface, we've already been inculcated by existing in society with some value to these rights and some value to freedom of religion. I remember when I first said this in the shir, maybe it must be 15 years ago. I said in the shir to someone that we don't hold freedom of religion. This guy, what are you talking about? Because to him, freedom of religion was such a basic right. It was such a basic value. We don't hold the value of freedom of religion? How could that be? So the fact is, though, is your argument is we don't. So how do you live if we don't? How do you live with this tension in terms of these values?
Well, I mean, the supposition it's not freedom of religion. The supposition is that democracy itself is the highest value of government. Okay. Because our alternatives are not as attractive.
Okay, fine. So
we accept that as the culmination.
So how do you live that with the Torah perspective?
The democracy is very imperfect.
So therefore, the Torah doesn't think of democracy.
What?
The Torah would not be supportive of democracy.
No.
So therefore, if you were forming,
monarchy.
If you were creating a country right now, you would not apply democracy.
No. No, assuming that I had a messianic king.
Ah, yes. God picks the king. Yeah. You have no problems.
Right.
But we don't have God picking the king right now.
In the interim, democracy is best.
So how do you live with that in terms of values?
How do I live with that?
Yeah, because does the Torah say, hey, given the fact we don't have a messianic king, it's okay for us to practice freedom of religion?
I think that we don't have an alternative.
Wait.
Freedom of religion guarantees a minority, which we are.
But notice my question.
It's not.
But what about if we were the majority creating our country? So you're saying, well, we have to do
the majority, then for sure. No, I wouldn't believe in freedom of religion. Definitely.
Really?
Yeah.
So you know what's interesting about this is the fact that we have values that we have undertaken from American Canadian society that have integrated into our minds. And not only is it integrated in our minds because we were indoctrinated, we've also benefited from it. Ramosha says, he says this on many occasions, but he refers to America Medina Shel Chesed. He's very upset with people who ask questions about taxation. He says, what do you want to pay your taxes for? It's a Medina Shel Chesed. It's great to us. So he said, this is a great country. So you look at this and say, what was Ramosha saying? Medina Shel Chesed, because it was beneficial to us. But would he apply the same rules as the Medina Shel Chesed to another group if he was in charge? So let me give you an example that leads me to think that Ramosha would understand the question of what I'm asking. There was a thing that happened a few years back in Skokie, where the Nazis wanted to march through Skokie. It was a whole big issue, and they argued for the freedom of speech, they should be allowed to march through Skokie, which was basically a predominantly Jewish thing. They just wanted to, stalk the Jews by marching through Skokie. So it was a whole big issue. It's over. And I remember I saw a press conference. It started a press conference. Of course, you had the Nazis standing over there. You had an ACLU lawyer defending the Nazis, Schwartz or Rosenberg, of course, a nice Jewish boy, right? And he was defending the Nazis' right to freedom of speech. So some reporter gets up and says, "Excuse me, sir," to the Nazi. He says, "If you were running a country, would you let the Jews do this?" And he says, "Of course not. We never let the people talk." He says, "You're autocratic." He says, "So why do you think you should have the right if you wouldn't give the right to the others?" So he said something. He says, "Listen, if you're stupid enough to have a rule of freedom of speech to allow me to speak, why should I take advantage of it? But I wouldn't be that stupid to abide by that rule." That tells you something. Is that our attitude? Baruch Hashem, we live in this country. they give us freedom of religion, but if we had freedom of religion, we would never be tolerant to them. I don't think so. I have my own shot in freedom of religion. Maybe we'll get back to another point and share that how there is an aspect of freedom of religion within Torah. We have been affected by values, and these values are permeated, and we've seen positive reasons for these values, even they're just pragmatic. But those values seem not to be straightforward values from Torah. So the truth is not only are we talking theoretically, this forward movement and so forth, by living in this society, we have picked up values which we think have legitimacy. So how do we relate to those values from a Torah perspective? We don't live in a Torah did not exist in a vacuum, it exists in the real world. We've been in the real world. And we've picked up other values, we picked up movement, we picked up other ideas. That is the essence of the question of contemporary issues in Hashkafa. It's the fact that how does Torah relate to the dynamic movement in this world? And we are involved in that dynamic movement. Okay, so that's where we're going to go to, and we're going to go to issues such as women in Judaism, autonomy, authority, freedom of religion, rights. We're going to talk about changes in morality. That's a big issue.